Okay, so we've been talking the last two lectures about uh, the big idea of the 16th century, and that is that Christian practice should be based on the Bible, number one, and number two, that it's perfectly legitimate to break away from the Catholic Church in order to do so. All right? So Christianity fractures, and most of the new interpretations of Christianity all go back to the Bible in some way or other. Although, of course, you know, this is why there's so many of them. The Bible's a big book with a lot of things in it. Okay, this does not mean that everyone leaves the fold of the Roman Catholic Church. This, a lot of people see no reason to do this. A lot of people have been conditioned to think of the Catholic Church as being identical with Christianity. But how are we going to save the Catholic Church? What are we going to do? What are we going to do about Protestantism? So, needless to say, all these people breaking away from the Catholic Church and forming their own interpretations of Christianity and acting on them, this is a problem if you're Catholic. And one of the things that they finally admit to themselves is, geez, maybe these people have a point. Okay? Maybe the Catholic Church is in a bad way, and maybe we need to clean up our act. And that's where the whole notion of the Catholic Reformation comes from. Now, it used to be called the Counter-Reformation, okay? The Counter-Reformation emphasizing everything the Catholics did to fight against Protestantism. Instead, perhaps it's better to think of it as a Catholic Reformation. It's not just about fighting against Protestantism, it's also about getting your own house in order. Now, this problem was deemed to be such a big one that Pope Paul III was moved to call a general council in order to deal with it. Now, remember that popes don't like councils. They don't like councils because that suggests that the Pope is not absolutely in charge. But this was deemed to be such a grave problem that they needed input from all the stakeholders, so to speak. So that is where the Council of Trent comes from. And as you can see, it lasted for 18 years. They basically went through Catholic doctrine and practice basically line by line and decided, is this good or should we get rid of it? And actually, Lutherans attended the opening sessions of the Council of Trent. The idea being that, well, if the Catholic Church becomes more biblical, then maybe we will rejoin it. And in fact, there was a faction of Catholics. I mean, people like Erasmus, not that he was there, but there were some Catholic intellectuals like Erasmus who felt that they valued church unity, but they thought that the church could become more biblical. I mean, that would be a good thing for the church to do. But there was another faction at the Council of Trent. They basically said, you know what, the Bible is good, but the Bible is not the be-all and the end-all of Christianity. In fact, it is this faction that ended up winning. The Lutherans were sent packing, and the Catholic Church did not become more biblical. Their argument was this. When we're talking about going back to the source, it is misguided to think of the source as the Bible. This humanist notion of going back to the original text doesn't apply to the Christian religion. I mean, if you are trying to establish, the first text of Cicero, then yes, find the earliest text of Cicero and make that the basis of your analysis. But if we're trying to renew Christian practice, it doesn't make sense to go back to the Bible because Christianity does not begin with the Bible. Christianity begins with Jesus. Jesus did not write the Bible. He founded a church. All right? So the church precedes the Bible. The church produced the Bible. And the church is a living tradition, right? Jesus appointed St. Peter his heir, and St. Peter had the various bishops of Rome as his successor. Okay? And so, I mean, speaking of the Bible, if you want to, let's go back to the Petrine doctrine, right? What you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. What you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven. So Catholicism is very much a living tradition. And if the Pope endorses something, then it's all good. The Pope has the power to do that. Okay? And just because he endorses things like saints or pilgrimage or transubstantiation or other things that aren't necessarily justified by the Bible, that doesn't matter. It's all good. All right? So I'd like you to remember that, okay? Because we're so used, I mean, in this country, Christianity is pretty much Protestant Christianity. There aren't very many Catholics around, and their Catholic sensibilities are not haven't been very influential in American history. But this is the key to understanding Catholicism, that Christianity is a living tradition as founded by Jesus. It doesn't do anyone good to go back to the Bible. Okay? The church precedes the Bible. Okay, now the adjective for Trent is tridentine. Okay, for some reason it's got this florid adjective. All right, so we talk about a tridentine Mass or tridentine Catholicism. Basically, it means Catholicism after the Council of Trent. All right, and the Council of Trent affirmed a lot of traditional Catholic belief. Okay, 7 sacraments, not 2. Monasticism, saints, faith, and good works. Okay, you want to incentivize good works. All right, it is a good thing to do a good deed that will get you points off purgatory. All right, and yes, there is a purgatory, and yes, you can buy indulgences to get people out of there. All right. Yeah, maybe the church was a little corrupt in the way that it offered indulgences for sale. That doesn't mean they're not efficacious. Okay, the church also reaffirmed the Latin Bible. All right, this is another church tradition. It might not be the original Bible, and it might not be a vernacular Bible, but this is the Bible that has worked for the church for over 1,000 years, and so they're not going to change it. Okay, yeah, maybe you should learn Latin before you're able to read the Bible. All right. Maybe you shouldn't just have this give Bibles to people. All right, that's like giving the keys to a Ferrari to an 8-year-old. You're going to get into trouble. So yeah, you should be educated before you can get your hands on the Bible. And by the way, we'll tell you what it means. The big charge against Catholics is that they're not allowed to think for themselves. That's a bit unfair. But anyway, the church would simply say, look, if if you let people come up with their own interpretations of Christianity based on their own reading of the Bible, you all hell will break loose. All right, we're going to have anarchy. Indeed, look what happened when Lutheran ideas got out to the German peasantry. There was a major revolt. But we don't want that. We do not want that. We want a top-down hierarchical church that will keep people in line. Now, priests, this has been on the agenda since the Gregorian reform, but this time they're really serious about it. You have to be 25 if you're going to be a priest. Every diocese had to establish a seminary for the training of priests, and if you want to be a priest, you have to study there. So again, it's not just you haven't just undergone holy orders, you've actually formally studied Christian doctrine and practice so that you're able to explain it, so that you're able to explain to people why we do what we do. Now, the last line there, Index Librorum Prohibitorum, that means the index of prohibited books. The Holy Office is also synonymous with the Inquisition. Okay, these are two of the more perhaps embarrassing aspects of the Counter-Reformation, Catholic Reformation. Index of Prohibited Books was basically a list of all the books that you're not allowed to read as a Catholic. So obviously all of Luther's works are on there, all of Calvin's works are on there, any other heretical works. They're going to put on any pornography that's published, that goes on there, okay? And again, that's, it's kind of embarrassing, right? That the Catholic Church is telling you what you can and can't read. Catholics can't think for themselves, right? The Catholic Church would simply say, no, people need guidance. We want to keep people on the right path here. Same thing with the Inquisition. The Inquisition is, it investigated heresy, and it had the power to punish you if it discovered that you were a heretic. Galileo was the one who got into trouble with the Inquisition, all right? It wasn't nearly as deadly as people think, but yeah, they investigated heresy, all right? So the Catholic Church is not particularly interested in freedom of conscience or freedom of thought. But as I say, they made no apologies for that. And in truth, Lutherans, I don't know how many people they burnt at the stake, but I know that Calvinists burnt Michael Servetus at Geneva. He denied the Holy Trinity, and so up in flames he went. So, Protestants can also persecute people for heresy. Okay, one last aspect of the Catholic Reformation are certain new orders of priests and monks and nuns, the most important of which are the Jesuits. Okay? The Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus as they're known, the brainchild of one Ignatius Loyola, okay, who was a Spanish nobleman and a soldier and was injured and was recovering. And he read a book of devotions on his bedside table, and he had a conversion experience, although this was not a conversion experience like John Calvin had. He was on fire for the Catholic Jesus. Okay? And he was very keen on, once he got better, he got himself ordained a priest, and he, with two other friends, founded a new group called the Society of Jesus. They got papal recognition, and their remit was to reconvert Europe to Catholicism. I mean, the thing is, Protestants are on the offensive, okay? Protestants are willing to get out there and explain why they do things. The Catholic Church, unfortunately, was just, it took itself for granted, They didn't really have to work very hard to convince people because it was just there. The Catholic Church was pervasive. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore. The Catholic Church will endorse the Jesuits, and the Jesuits will actually go out there and explain things, why we do what we do. The Church precedes the Bible. This is good. This is good for you. All right? They were very keen on education as well. And so there's lots of Jesuit schools. Certainly any place you discover that is named Loyola, there's lots of Loyola universities. Those are all Jesuit universities. That emblem, the IHS with a cross in the middle of the H and the three nails at the bottom, that is a Jesuit emblem. You see that on a university coat of arms, you know that that is a Jesuit school. All right? And the Jesuits were remarkably successful, okay? Poland, for instance, was half Protestant at one point. It became almost 100% Catholic again, thanks to the Jesuits, okay? The other thing about this time is that, well, Europe is expanding, and the fields are ripe unto harvest. And everywhere the Europeans go, they discover people who have never heard the words of Jesus. And, go ye therefore and make disciples of all nations. So the Jesuits were instrumental in going out and converting native people all over the world to Catholicism. All right? And Francis Xavier is the name of the Jesuit most associated with this. There's actually St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. I think there are other St. Francis Xavier universities as well. All right. Oh, at the bottom there, AMDG. Every time you see Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, to the greater glory of God, that is also a Jesuit motto. And then finally, we've got a couple of prayer guards. Okay. Obviously, both Loyola and Saint FX were canonized, so they are saints, and you can get them on prayer cards. There is Ignatius Loyola with his open Bible, Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, and the IHS on it. Okay, so you know that that is Loyola. And then on the right, we've got a really remarkably politically incorrect prayer card of St. Francis Xavier come to convert the natives. And he's, so if look at that, he's got his cross out, he's got a beam of light shining down on him, and the native guy just falls down at the power of this. Needless to say, we don't really depict this sort of thing anymore. But you know it's a foreign. They've got the palm tree. That's usually the symbol of being abroad, right? The palm tree. And that was St. Francis Xavier. He is buried in Goa in India, actually, if you ever wanted to see his gravesite. Okay, so that's what I'd like you to take away from this. I mean, there's various ways of being Protestant, but the Catholics have a reason for doing what they do. Yes, they're going to have to cut down on the corruption. All right, they're going to have to cut down on the pluralism and the uneducated priests and the venality of the church. Okay, but there is no reason why they need to make the church more biblical. To identify corruption with non-biblicism is a step too far. That doesn't, the one does not follow from the other. It just means that you have to clean up Catholicism and take it seriously. Now, I'm not going to tell you which one is better. In fact, you don't even need to believe any of this if you don't want. But you do have to understand the fact that these are this is very, very important to people. It was certainly very important at the time, and this was the cause of a great deal of European politics and unfortunately European war. But we won't get to the wars of religion in this lecture. All right. Take care and stay healthy.